Professor SUMIOKA's University Standard Philosophy course. Hi everyone! Long time no see. The second half of the series starts today. Many famous modern philosophers will be appearing, won't they?
You are as impatient as ever. Modern philosophy was built, not only by famous philosophers. Unlike ancient and medieval times which were dominated by politics and religion, modern times are supported by the ordinary people.
Who are the ordinary people?
They are neither heroes nor geniuses, neither saints nor villains. They are the ones who waver between good and evil, truth and falsehood.
That is the view of humanity that the fictional circle found in the Renaissance, isn't that?
Yeah, these ordinary people changed the world during the transition from the medieval to the modern era. Defeated by Islam and the Mongols, the Europeans lost the path to the east. However, Portugal in the West End captured Islamic cities on the African coast, with the remnants of the Knights Templar.
It would be an extension of the Reconquista of Iberia.
Prester John, Marco Polo, and spherical earth theory changed them. In 1122, during the Crusades, the impostor Prester John met the Pope, and told that there is a Christian country beyond the Islamic world. People believed in him, because they had heard a legend that St. Thomas preached in India. In addition, although not India, Ethiopia in East Africa was actually an Eastern Christian country. Marco Polo was a traveler who visited China during the Mongol Empire at the end of the 13th century, and left a record of what he saw and heard. The book was initially dismissed as fantasy, but Asian spices and the golden land of Zapanga written in it fascinated the people.
Did they find themselves spherical stelae?
No, when Europeans conquered Iberia, they heard of it from the Muslims. However, they still believed in flat earth. According to it, the earth is a disk centered on Jerusalem, and if we would go beyond the edge of the ocean, we would fall into the flames of purgatory. Actually, as a ship traveled south along the African coast, scorching heat hit. The inland was also a vast barren desert. So no one would go far.
That's just because of getting closer to the equator.
But they didn't know even that the earth is round, so they couldn't understand the equator.
True.
However, the Portuguese explorer Dinis Dias reached the Cape Verde in 1445, and discovered that there is a rich green jungle to the south.
That was shortly before the fall of the Byzantine Empire.
But after that, they had to have a hard time. The African continent was much larger than they had thought, and even after going down the southern hemisphere, the coast continued endlessly. Finally in 1488, Dinis' son, Bartolomeu Dias, could cross the Cape of Good Hope to the east.
It's amazing! The Dias family have paved the way to the world.
Through the solar altitude, it was proven that the Earth was round from north to south. So, the Europeans finally supposed that the Earth would be round also in the east and west directions. Thus, Columbus could get a fund from Spain, and reached West India in 1492. The Pope of the Spanish Borgia family at once defined that the west more than 100 leagues, namely about 500 kilometers of the Portuguese Azores Islands, belongs to Spain.
Without even knowing what the Atlantic Ocean is like, he had divided it into east and west.
Via the Cape of Good Hope, Vasco da Gama of Portugal reached the real India in 1498. In addition, in 1500, Portugal discovered a land in the southern hemisphere, and it was east of Pope's line, so belonged to Portugal. Portugal had Amerigo Vespucci, who served the Medicis in Florence, investigate it, and realized that it was not India, but the new continent.
Spain and the Pope had moved too hastily.
The Church fought against the Renaissance, with witch hunting by the Dominican order. It was regarded as the salvation of those who had fallen into heresy, so carried out using their own property. The Inquisition involved drowning suspects in a river, and if they floated, they would be set on fire as witches, but if they sank, the suspicions were cleared. In short, when once suspected, anyway taken away lives and property. In fact, it was the way to crush the emerging merchants, who got wealth recently.
They could not understand modern business, so it would seem like witchcraft for them.
The Borgia family of Granada got power through the Reconquista, and produced Pope Alexander VI, in 1492. He overthrew Savonarola of the Dominican order, and put on sale the indulgence that spared the suspicion of being witches. With the profit, he established the papal army led by his son Cesare, and expanded the Papal States, like a secular prince.
He was the Pope who drew the line in the Atlantic Ocean, right?
Franciscan Julius II, a rival of the Borgia family, became Pope in 1503. He continued to expand the Papal States through diplomacy, and sought to make Rome, the capital of Renaissance, replacing Florence. The largest project was the new enormous St. Peter's Basilica. He entrusted it to Bramante, and then to Michelangelo.
It was a shift from sticks to carrots.
Meanwhile, Emperor was now a mere title, and the Habsburg family in the mountains of Austria barely kept it, as a puppet of the German princes. However, when France continued to expand even after winning the 100 Years' War, the Duchess of Burgundy married the brave knight Maximilian I of Habsburg in 1477. Supported by the Fugger family, who had mines in Austria, their son married the Princess of Spain in 1496, and they came into conflict with the Borgias of Granada.
Both of them seem to have bad tempers.
Burgundy was once a significant route of the north-south trade of Europe. The Habsburg Empire, which stretched from Austria to Spain, pushed it up again. The Netherlands in particular, prospered through its woolen textile industry, with imported wool of Frandel, furthermore of England.
The time was cold by the Little Ice Age, so people would want wool or fabric.
Yeah, in both production and consumption, the economy was now driven by ordinary people, not monasteries. Also philosophically, humanity was on the focus. Influenced by the Fitino circle of a view of humanity, between good and evil, it was not denied as in the medieval ages, nor glorified as in the Renaissance, but the reality of it was faced.
Aha, there was humanism, right?
A painter of the Netherlands, Bosch, was good at religious altarpieces, but he began to include many allegories, in Fitino circle style, and eventually his altarpieces became fantasy-like, full of bizarre monsters. Erasmus of Netherlands, although a priest and courtier, also wrote in prose of folly, as a bizarre parody of classics, and mocked the stupidity of the people in the church and the courts.
What happened to Florence after Savonarola?
With the help of France, Machiavelli defended the Republic against the expanding Papal States. However, the Habsburgs defeated Cesare Borgia of Granada in 1507, and invaded also Florence in 1512, restoring the Medici family to power, and making Leo X of Medici, the Pope. He promoted Renaissance in Florence and Rome, and continued the construction of the Basilica with Raphael. Meanwhile, forced to retire in the suburbs, Machiavelli wrote The Prince, in which he argued that a prince should prioritize reality over morality.
That shows that the real human society cannot be solved by just nice words.
Erasmus' young friend in England, Thomas More, also published a parody of Plato, Utopia, suiting to the age of discovery. A certain traveler criticized the corrupt England for wool exporting, and talked about an island he had visited on the new continent. There, all is planned by the excellent prince, scholars, and priests, so they have no fight and war, but cannot have also property, even secrets.
It would be an irony. Indeed, the real world is not easy to live, but such an ideal country must be much harder to live. Did the restart of the Renaissance go well?
The Habsburgs and the Medicis spent too much, and could not pay back to the Fuggers anymore. So they gave the Fuggers the right to issue indulgence, and made the Dominicans sell it in Germany. They said, "This saves even the dead." But Luther, a young monk in Saxony, denounced this as an overreach of the Pope in 1517. According to him, the papal keys were valid only as a recommendation to heaven, and should not be able to overturn God's decision.
But, or Inquisition, people also would have hated such forceful sales.
In opposition to the Habsburgs in league with the Church, the Duke of Saxony protected Luther, and Luther translated the Bible into German. Instead of indulgence, Emperor Charles V of Habsburg and the Fuggers had to seek new financial sources overseas. They recruited the Portuguese Magellan, and had him again explore the western route to the true India, with the Spanish fleet. Magellan sailed over the southern tip of the new continent, and into the Pacific Ocean in 1520. Cortes of Spain also began invading the friendly Aztec Empire of Mexico.
In short, they changed their target to plunder from Germany to India and the new continent.
At last, Pope Leo X of Medici excommunicated Luther in 1521, and together with Emperor Charles V of Habsburg, recaptured Milan from French occupation. Cortes conquered the Aztecs, and also brought a lot of gold and silver to Spain. Although Magellan died in the Philippines, his fleet crossed the Indian Ocean, and returned in 1522, demonstrating that the Earth is also round in east and west directions.
Thus, Spain with worldwide colonies was called the empire on which the sun never sets.
In 1523, Pope Leo X died, and Clement VII of Medici became the Pope. Inspired by Luther, peasants in southern Germany also rebelled against the princes in 1524, but Luther opposed them. Although the theologist Erasmus of Netherlands persuaded him moderately that we will be saved by our good deeds, Luther insisted sola fide, namely by faith alone, and that we are all incorrigible sinners, nevertheless we are saved only by the unmerited grace of God.
Although salvation by good deed might be easy to accept, it had been theologically declared a heresy since the Council of Ephesus in 431 by the Augustinians as paganism, hadn't it? So in terms of theological debates, Luther seems to be more orthodox than Erasmus.
To counter the growing power of the Habsburgs with the Church, not only the Duke of Saxony, but also the other princes supported Luther, and suppressed the peasants, together with him. The King of England, Henry VIII, and even Pope Clement VII, switched from the Habsburgs to France, in 1526.
So did Luther, the German princes, France, England, and even the Pope unite against the Habsburgs?
At once, Charles V attacked Rome in 1527, and forced the Pope to crown him. In addition, he made Conquistador Pizarro destroy the Golden Inca Empire of Peru, in 1533. The King of England, Henry VIII, wanted to divorce Catherine of Habsburg, but the Pope could not allow it. So he established his independent Church of England, in 1534. Lord Chancellor Thomas More opposed this, and was executed for treason.
For More, there was just collateral damage.
A young French theologist, Calvin, published Institutes of the Christian Religion, in 1536. After Luther, he emphasized human sin and God's grace, but he insisted, even faith is planned in advance by God, as predestination. Thus, he revived electoralism. Chosen people by God should have perseverance, and would follow strict discipline by themselves. He realized theocracy in Geneva, with the precepts of thrift and hard work.
What was different from Savonarola?
On the other hand, Spanish Loyola, together with Xavier and other theological students of Paris University, founded the Society of Jesus, or Jesuit, in 1540, and would make a pilgrimage to Jerusalem. However, due to conflicts with the Ottoman Empire, it was unable to, so as a service, they built many schools for people throughout Europe and even overseas, and spread Catholicism again, by teaching classics. Although the Jesuit was an organization like an army, the members could act independently even in remote places, with spiritual exercises, in which each person meditated on God's will directly, as well as the Muslims and the Protestants.
That would be no longer Catholicism centered on the Pope, but a sort of Protestantism which has a direct connection to God.
Copernicus, a Polish priest, was fascinated by Ptolemy of Alexandria's Almagest, written in the 1st century. It explained the complex motions of the planets, with their orbital epicycles, but he realized, this system is geometrically identical to the rotation of the Earth and planets around the Sun. However, the idea that the Sun is at the center of the universe was pagan, and risked being labeled as heresy. So he didn't publish his theory, shortly before he died in 1543.
Although expeditions had already proven that the Earth is a ball, the Church still obsessed with the Earth being the center of the universe.
Peter Bruegel the Elder of the Netherlands, took over Bosch's fantastic style full of allegorical monsters. But his works were no more religious altarpieces in churches, but mass-produced prints of caricatures on proverbs and ironies, and sold well to the common people. By preference, he also painted genre scenes, namely the daily life of village farmers and ordinary people. Those were so popular, that his son, Peter Bruegel the Younger, made many copies of them to sell.
Unlike the renaissance of wealthy merchants and nobles, art became now of the common people.
French civil wars of religion began in 1562, and also in the Netherlands against the Habsburgs in 1566. A jural aristocrat, Montaigne of Bordeaux, educated Latin by his private tutor, had friends of both sides of the Catholics and the Protestants. He retired to his territory in 1571, and spent all day with reading classics and writing the essays. Fed up with the assertion and condemnation of both the Catholics and the Protestants, he wrote out what he knew, reflected on it, and examined it. As the result, he realized that human beings are diverse, changeable, and finite, so he encouraged people to be more tolerant.
Dogmatic assumptions and condemnations are outdated.
The cold weather and the new continent needed woolen fabrics more, but due to the war against Spain, the Netherlands stopped making it. So England, which supplied wool, began to produce it in their factories. This led to more conversion of farmland into ranches, and many tenant farmers had to move to cities and work in factories.
That was the enclosure that Thomas More had criticized, saying sheep eat men.
The newcomers of cities wanted new entertainment, Elizabethan theatrical plays. Shakespeare was one of the actors, and wrote his own plays too. The English Reformation transformed the Catholic convents into grammar schools for people, and he also learned Latin there. Adopting stories of classics and historical or foreign events, like Julius Caesar, Hamlet, Romeo and Juliet, and A Midsummer Night's Dream, he performed them as plays for people who could not read books. Queen Elizabeth I also liked his plays and supported him.
Theater also opened up literature to the common people. In addition, these stories were about the people who wander between good and bad.
Galileo, a professor of mathematics at the University of Padua, conducted various physics experiments, such as pendulum and fall, and attempted to express them mathematically. He was interested in Copernicus' heliocentric theory, and observed the stars with a telescope he built himself. However, rejecting the official Aristotelian philosophy, his acquaintances, the Neapolitan Dominicans Bruno and Campanella, were arrested for heresy. Bruno was burned at the stake in 1600, while Campanella escaped death by pretending to be insane, and wrote The City of the Sun, a communist state based on astrology. Galileo was also warned, and he denied the heliocentric theory, but was finally sentenced to life imprisonment in 1633, too.
Did the church still think they could stop the times by burning at the stake?
Queen Elizabeth I died without a child in 1603. As a result, James the King of Scotland, a distant relative, became the King of England, as well. But he was unaccustomed to England, so Francis Bacon, a lawyer from a distinguished family, had to support him. However, it was not easy. Although Britain was a Protestant country, it had to cooperate with the Catholic Spain to expand into Asia and the new continent. In addition, James I did not understand the distinction between royal and national finances, and indulged in extravagance.
Everyone but him would have shunned such a country king.
Bacon eventually became the Lord Chancellor in 1618. However, the new Emperor Ferdinand II tried to return all of Germany to Catholicism. The 30 Years' War broke out in 1618, and James I's son-in-law, the Elector of the Palatinate, was held up as the representative of the Protestants. Bacon also had to raise taxes in preparation for the war, but in 1621, he was found guilty of bribery and lost his position.
It seems like a political plot, but it was probably good for him to be relieved from such a troublesome age.
After his retirement, Bacon wrote the Novum Organum, as a replacement for Aristotle's logic. In it, he reflected on himself, saying that the ambition to expand one's power in one's own country is vulgar, that it is arrogant to expand one's country's power in the world, so that we should expand the power of humanity in the universe, like printing, gunpowder, and the compass, which had brought our times.
From the start, he should have become a philosopher, not a politician.
Nature rules all, but technology can transform it to the form in which we can use it. So he said, knowledge is power. However, he rejected scholastic dialectics, because, even if the development is logically sound, the original premises have often no reason. Nature is conquered by obeying her, namely, only with patient observance.
Yeah, how much we discuss about God who we do not know well, it's fruitless.
But observance may include mistakes, still by our minds, for idola mentis. Idola tribus, illusion by races, is by the tendency of human intelligence, without reason, to assume that nature should be in some order. Idola specus, illusion in the cave, is by the subjectivity that reflects prejudice, preference, and education of the observer himself. Idola fore, the illusion of the market, is by the words with empty or confused meanings in our thinking. Idola theatri, the illusion of theater, is by dogmatic superstition or wrong demonstration, produced by speculation without experience.
Actually, our thoughts are full of idola, aren't they?
He explained his further method with the analogy of the ant, the spider, and the bee. while an experimenter only collects something existing, like the ant, and a reasoner fudges something vacant by themselves, like the spider, we should be like the bee, gathering material from the flowers, and transforming it into the real thing. It is induction. For this, he proposed arranging experiences into the table of presence, the table of absence, and the table of degrees, and comparing them.
I was expecting something amazing, but his induction is like a kid's summer research, in contrast to the mathematical method of Copernicus and Galileo.
Yeah, he was not a scientist, but just a snob of science. He also dreamed of the scientism utopia, and depicted it in the New Atlantis. According to him, it is a Christian island on the Pacific coast of South America, established by Saint Bartholomew, and survived through the Great Deluge in the new continent. Now the center is Solomon's house, integrating knowledge of the world, in the way of induction, and it manages all scientifically, even work, marriage, and family. It has even the high technology, similar to nuclear power, laser communication, and genetic manipulation too.
He might be just a nod of science fiction.
However, his idea actually led modern society ever since.